Welcome to the Cross the Line podcast. My name is Carlos Smith, and I have another special guest with me today. We are down in Charleston, South Carolina, and we have Pastor Corey Aiken of Grace Community Church of Charleston. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you, sir. So I want to tell you how I actually found your story first. I can't remember which one of my friends shared it on Facebook, but it just happened to just go like viral where we were. And I was just reading it, and you were just saying how 10 years ago you showed a picture of you with flashing money and everything, and how you didn't care whether you made it home dead or alive. So I was like, man, it's got to be an interesting story, like a lot of stuff behind it. So I was like, let me just reach out to you, and thankfully you responded and you were willing to do an interview. So just telling people kind of more about it. Like, how was your childhood growing up?
My childhood was, for the most part, I had a good childhood. I grew up in church. I actually got the mic in my hand and started speaking in church. I was about 4 years old. So I started really young. Religious family. I had one older brother in the home with me. So overall, I had a good childhood. Grew up with religious values and a two-parent home as well.
Did you feel like growing up that religion was kind of forced upon you?
I wouldn't say forced. Forced is a really strong word, but I would say that it was an indicated way of life. So it was something that was presented, but there were no other options at the same time.
Right. So,
we went to Sunday school, we went to revival, we went to Bible study. It was just a way of life, and at that time I didn't know anything better. And as I began to become active in church at such a young age, it actually gave me a little motivation to want to go.
So you never got to a point where it was, since you were in church so much and that's all you knew, did it get exhausting to a sense?
It got exhausting maybe in my teenage years when I then started looking into other things of the world and in the streets and whatnot. Because at that point, everyone always knew I was going to be a preacher. My uncle, my late bishop, spoke and said, he's going to pastor one day. And all of that was good while I was young, but as I got older, I began to be curious about other things. It's just simply something I didn't want to do with my whole life. I got to see the backdrop of ministry. I got to see the stress of ministry. I got to see the weight of ministry. And it did become a little taxing where I was like, well, instead of going to Bible study, I just want to go to the movies. Or instead of going to church, I just want to do something else, hang out with my friends. So in that regard, yes.
Well, what was it like? When your uncle, you said, kind of spoke that on you about you being a pastor when you grew up, did you feel like there was a little pressure as well to kind of live up to what he was speaking?
It didn't really feel like pressure to me, because again, at that time I was already speaking in church. And the crazy thing is there was no one else in my age group that had been granted that, opportunity. So it wasn't, I was honored, excited, really didn't understand it, and to be honest, didn't really believe it. Because in my mind, I'm thinking like, how? How am I going to get there? It seemed impossible at the church I was attending. It seemed impossible because there were so many other people that were ahead of me. So it's something that I heard and something I just kind of, as soon as I left church, pushed out of my mind. It wasn't really pressure. It was something that I heard, and I'm like, okay, all right.
So what do you feel like made you, in a sense, turn to the streets and want to do other things?
Well, it was somewhat of a trickle-down effect. It wasn't like I just woke up one morning and was like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Right. As the dynamics of my home life changed when my parents split, and just me wanting something different, wanting something fresh. And that's why here at Grace I try to keep a fresh approach. I try to do things outside of the structure of the church to keep the youth engaged, because we're living in a day and time where people may not come out for a revival, but they may come out for a men's night at the shooting range.
Right.
They may not come out for, a prophetic service, but they may come out for movie night. So that approach, just church, and this was a very traditional church, very, very traditional and antiquated in their approach. And I say that in respect, very antiquated. So it led me looking for something fresh, and when I began to go to public school, and began to be exposed, to show you how sheltered I was in a sense, it wasn't until I got to public school that I really heard secular music.
Wow.
Really heard secular music, and I'm like, oh man, this is nice, you know. So I began to hear secular music, catch up on, and listening to music. The kind of music that I was listening to was influential, and like, okay, well, this was up. So when I began to be exposed to different elements, in some cases I could not even tell what it was. I'm like, whatever it is, this is real. This is not, you know, synthetic or whatever. This is real deal.
So you were in private school the entire time?
I wasn't in private school. I was in magnet school. So I was magnet school is like creative arts school. So I went to Ashley River Creative Arts, and then I went to C.E. Williams for the scientific and arts. So I went to magnet school up until high school. Then I went to public school, and the public school system was a whole lot different. You got exposed to a whole lot more that grabbed my attention.
So going to a public school and your parents split, did you kind of feel like, of course, they may not tell you everything, but did you feel like part of it was like on you why they split or anything, or?
No, not at all. I wasn't one of those that, you know, it's like, oh, it's my fault. In my mind, it's like, this is y'all fault. Because I saw the background of it, and I saw things. It got to the point where it was better that they be separated, better that they not be together. And the only reason I said their dynamics played a part is because my mother was much more strict, much more, you know, religious driven, and my father was not so much religious. Christian believer, but not so much religious. So living with my mother, I got a certain leeway of privileges, whereas living with my father, I could pretty much do what I want.
So after, when you went to school, you actually went with your dad, and that's when you...
Through high school. Not at the beginning of high school. It's maybe like my second year in high school is when I started living with my father.
So as you started listening to different music and everything, and did your parents, did they start seeing that in you, where you were kind of going away from what you learned growing up?
I'm sure they did. Sometimes I believe you can be too close to the mirror, so to speak, to really see yourself changing and progressing, because I was still church oriented. I still went to church on Sundays. I still, you know, went to Bible study. Of course, I found any reason I could to get out of it.
Right.
But at least on Sundays, even when I was hustling heavy in the streets, as a independent entrepreneur, so to speak, Sunday mornings people knew he's going to church.
Wow.
I never lost that.
It's got to be a crazy feeling knowing, you know, through the week, you know, you're doing what you're doing, and then all of a sudden, you know, you hear about it all the time. People live like a totally different life. Like through the week, they do whatever, and then Sunday is when they, you know, come to church and, you know, they're saved and holy for a few hours, and then after that they go back to doing what they normally do. Did people look at you funny, like, hey, I just seen you just doing something else through the week, and then now you're here, like, living on...
Right. Now, at that point, I was not, like, preaching. I wasn't licensed to preach. I didn't start, like, officially preaching until after all that was over. So at this point where I'm hustling and still going to church, I'm just like a church goer. So I'm not holding any position in the church. And the church that I grew up in, where, you know, they would have me speak and sing, I was no longer attending that church because I wasn't living with my mother, and that's my mother's side of the family. So I was going to a totally different church. They did not know me, so I was just going to sit, watch, you know, enjoy the worship. And I was always a strong believer in tithing, so whatever I made that week, I would tithe on.
Drug money.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. I would tithe on it, and God would bless me.
Really?
Absolutely.
I'm trying to think of how to put it. So you didn't look at it in a way of, I don't want to put drug money in church, instead of like actually going to work. And did you ever feel like that was kind of the wrong thing to do?
Not at all. For me personally, I felt I believe that tithing is a principle. I believe that 10% of what we earn, whether we earn it honestly or not, belongs to God because that was my means of income.
Mm-hmm.
And I made a substantial income doing some rather dangerous things, and I understood it was only God that kept me through the week.
Mm-hmm.
I never lost my sense of relationship. Always have had relationship with God, even when I was not doing as I should. I still had sense enough to pray and ask God to keep me in what I was doing.
Right.
So after Him keeping me, it was only right to me. And even growing up, my mother always instilled in us how she would give us money throughout the week. We knew, okay, if I got $40 throughout the week, then I will put $4 in church.
Right.
So it was a habit. It was something we were trained to do, and it was something that just came automatic for me to do it. Now, did people probably know my tithes were coming from illegal means? Probably so. But again, I was going to a church where no one knew me, which was one of the best things I ever did. No one knew me. No one knew anything about me. They just knew, okay, that's the quiet guy that's coming.
So did your parents know where the money was actually coming from?
They probably did. They probably did not have a clear understanding.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I flashed money around my parents or whatnot. So they didn't know if I had money or not. There were times when I worked intermittently, like for short periods of time,
Okay.
so they could assume, well, it came from that or whatnot. But it's not like I would come home and just sit $5,000 on the counter or something.
So nowadays, now that you're as a pastor and you look back, if you see a young man who's in the streets hustling the same way you did for a little while, and he, pays tithes, do you see an issue with that now? Or do you just like, hey, I did the same thing? Or you kind of understand it because you did the same?
I don't see an issue with it because here's the thing. No matter how many people talked to me back then or tried to warn me, I was going to do what I wanted to do regardless.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was to have a young man like that in my church, the best thing that I can do as a pastor is preach the word of God.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot clean a fish before you catch it. So I can't force someone to live right. And I think a lot of pastors mess up when they try to force people to live a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
All we have been set here to do as pastors is to proclaim the word of the Lord and to correct when necessary those of our local assembly. So if I have someone who is visiting, I believe rebuke without relationship is abuse. So I can't go in and say, hey, you need to stop doing this, you need to stop doing that. And secondarily, I understand it because I was not trying to just be this big, crime drug lord. I was trying to survive.
Right. What do you think pushes young adults away from church sometimes?
When church becomes antiquated and without movement,
Mm-hmm.
without relevance, they just lose interest. They don't see the need of it. Not that they don't love God, they just don't see the need of the structure of the church. Oftentimes the people in the church would probably be the number one issue that they stop coming to church.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're left in the place like, well, there's so many churches to choose from. And then they get trapped in that mindset, well, I can do church at home,
Mm-hmm.
which is a lie.
How do you get people from looking at it in a sense of maybe hypocritical? Because like you were saying, sometimes the people at the church can cause people to not want to come anymore. And, like I said, when they come in, sometimes they're holy, but then when they leave, they live a different life. Is it a way to kind of keep that out of the church, or is it, how do you handle those?
There's no way you can really keep that out of the church.
Mm-hmm.
I know for a fact that some that come to my church live crazy throughout the week.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing you can do about that, because when we begin to pick sins that prohibit people from coming to the church, then nobody would be left, including myself.
Right.
There's nothing I can do to, what I can do is make sure that my leaders, those that are in position, are walking in a way that is morally respectable.
Right.
Now, at that point, if they are not, then you can't lead in this church. But as far as the people, I believe the house of God is open to everyone,
Absolutely.
sinners included. So there's nothing I can do about that.
I want to get back to you in the streets. When you were doing what you were doing, did family members kind of cut ties and separate from you because of what you were doing?
Most actually, most. most kind of stepped back, kind of, so to speak, gave up, and some kind of kept their same relationship. For one, my brother always remained the same. We could not be more opposites in lives. Even now, we could not be more opposites. But we never lost our relationship. We still talked every day.
Were you the oldest?
He's the oldest.
He's the oldest. Okay. Did he try to get you to get out of hustle?
He never really lectured me.
Mm.
He never really lectured me, and I think that's one of the things about our relationship that have allowed us to remain close. So even now that I'm pastoring, and he's an individual who loves God, I believe he would identify himself as a believer, someone who is saved, but someone that does not go to church every Sunday. And never once do I hit him up like, hey, you need to be in church.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same kind of thing. We've always respected each other as individuals, and because of that, we've been able to remain friends.
So tell us, what made you actually want to turn your life back around? What was it, like a specific incident?
Well, I spent a short amount of time in the prison system, which gave me a lot of time to kind of reflect. Mm-hmm. And it's in there where I didn't have anything else to do. The program I was in did not have any literature, so I'm literally pretty much sitting in a room with nothing to do. So I'm feeling like I'm almost going crazy. I'm like, man, you at least got to give me a Bible. Mm-hmm. So I start, back then I was a lot different. I start, creating a ruckus. I'm like, yo, this is illegal. Right. You have to at least give me a Bible. So after them recognizing, like, hey, we do have to at least give them a Bible or a Quran, they did bring me a Bible. So I began to read, honestly, out of boredom. Mm-hmm. Out of nothing else to do. I'm in a room with nothing to do for over 3 months. There was no more. I slept out. I was not watching TV. There was nothing, literally nothing to do. So all I could do is read day and night.
So how much time did you actually serve? It was just those 3 months, or did you?
Well, I was in and out of jail, but I only served about 3 months in prison. So there's a difference. Jail is like the county jail. Prison is when you are sent off to like a secluded area. So that was totally different. So during that time when I began to read, and as I began to read, the Word of God is so powerful that even if you're just reading out of boredom, it will begin to transform your mind. Mm-hmm. It'll begin to touch your heart, and that's what began to happen.
Right. And then your family members, did they finally start seeing that change in you when you finally got back up?
Was not until recently, honestly, for most of them. Most of their approach, because I actually started preaching in prison. I started holding Bible studies in prison. So, of course, most of them were like, well, this is just because you locked up. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay. And when I got out, they were like, well, you're going to be right back in. You're going to be, back in the same thing, because I have been in and out the system, not in and out of prison, but in and out of jail and the system for so long. So their perspective was, he's going to be right back out. This is just a phase. So, but as the years begin to pass by, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, as time began to pass by, and as God's hand began to become more and more evident upon my life, they had no choice but to give God glory, and I meant that God's hand was.
Did that kind of hurt you when your to hear family members say, "Oh, he's gonna be back in jail"? Did that hurt you?
In my immaturity, it did for some. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by immaturity, because even now folks say different things, about me. And now it doesn't bother me at all, legitimately. Back then I would say, oh, it don't bother me, but it did bother me a little bit, because I felt like these individuals should. I'm not in the streets anymore, so why would you not support what I'm trying to do positively? Right. But nevertheless, it was God that really kept and sustained me, and I kept on, serving. And I would say maybe a year after my release, I was licensed to preach, and the rest is kind of in history since then.
Do you still associate with anyone that you were kind of in the streets with back then?
What do you mean by associate?
I guess you speak to them, or
if I see them,
not hang with them, but
if I see them, I show mad love to them, man. If I see him, I show mad love.
But you don't try to force it like, hey, you need to come to church.
No, just like with my brother, like I expect. I never, some may reach out as far as, hey man, I'm going through this. Can you pray for me? Can you look out for me? Can you, say a word for me? And I always do. But if I see them, it's nothing but love, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's nothing but love. I ask how things are going. How's everybody doing?
Mm-hmm.
So it's nothing but love when I see them.
Did you worry about maybe stressing your parents out when you were in and out? How were they doing in those times?
My mother was probably more stressed than anything, and at that time I didn't care.
Mm.
At that time, it was not really concerned about.
Do they come to your church now, or?
My mother still goes to the church that we grew up in, and again, my father's not like an average church goer. But when we do like special programs, or like the first church anniversary or my first pastoral anniversary, or when my kids were getting christened, and I usually look and we'll see them in the crowd.
What do you try to tell kids, that's going down the path that you went? What do you try to tell them now?
The main thing I can try to get them to focus on is the long haul, not living in the now, not focusing on what you want now, but how it's going to affect you. Because even for me, most of the trouble that I got in was back in like 2010, 2011. It's still things that follow me now, still things that show up on my record now. So that's the main picture I try to get them to see, that even though you're making a decision now and you're still, a teenager, this is something that can potentially follow you for several years.
Mm-hmm. I want to change gears just a little bit, and I want to ask you about another topic about forgiveness. And just want to know, do you think that forgiveness is overrated?
By overrated, you mean like?
Well, when I say that, I mean, it's one of the things that I thought about was the shooting that was at the church, Emmanuel AME. When Dylan Roof went in and he killed all those innocent people, people come back and say we want to forgive him for what he did, taking a family member away. And sometimes I think we'll forgive somebody who's taking a family member away from us, but somebody that might owe us $5 from a couple weeks ago, we don't want to talk to them anymore. So in a sense, do you feel like forgiveness is like overrated?
I don't think forgiveness is overrated. As a matter of fact, forgiveness is at the core of the gospel. But that scenario you gave proves that forgiveness in the lives of many believers is selective.
Mm-hmm.
So we will forgive someone like Dylan Roof because it's on a larger scale. And this is a church shooting, so people expect you to come out and say, hey, I forgive you. Forgiveness is not so much what you say with your mouth, but it's what happens in your heart. Because you can say that, well, I forgive you, but has that shift really happened in your heart?
Mm-hmm.
Forgiveness is something you can't really place a time limit on. But nevertheless, it's necessary. Jesus specifically says that if we do not forgive our brothers and sisters, that he will not forgive us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that has to be done.
How did you, speaking of that shooter, how did you actually look at that incident?
A tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
An act of terrorism. That's the only a tragedy in terrorism. That's the only way it could be looked at. It was very unfortunate, sobering. Happened. The church I grew up in is downtown, so this was about 10-15 minutes away from there.
Wow.
So it was an act of terrorism, and it was a tragedy.
And another thing about forgiveness, when something like that happens, do you expect people to forgive right away, or is it something that actually takes time before you actually?
I mean, there's every individual is on their own platform as far as maturity in Christ, and I believe it's unrealistic for someone to gun down my mother and for the next day to be like, okay, I forgive you,
right,
cool, let's
exactly.
go get something to eat. It's not. I'm being realistic here. That's more than likely not going to happen. It's something that probably does take time, just as the sting of death. When someone dies, there is no timetable how long they're going to take to get over it. So in the same sense, an offense like that versus you owe me $5 are on two totally different levels, and one may obviously require longer for me to honestly say I forgive you. But forgiveness does not necessarily mean reconciliation. So just because I forgive you, because you killed my loved one, that doesn't mean that we need to go out and get wings.
Right. And I was gonna say, it's like, I know it's like two different extremes, like somebody owe you money and somebody harming a family member and things like that. But it was just, I'm like, I just didn't understand. To me, I'm like, how can you forgive somebody who done so much more harm and then?
It's definitely hypocritical. I completely agree, and you see it a lot in the church. It's definitely a hypocritical move.
Yeah. And I see it again, and I it's just different things. And I don't want to really compare them, but it's things that have actually happened, like with like the R. Kelly situation, how he's been touching on young ladies allegedly, and different things like that. Like some people will say, yeah, we're done with him, but like the shooting incident, it's like, okay, we'll forgive him. And I'm not, I don't want to call anybody out. I mean, I know it's two different things, but it's just like, how can you say you forgive one person for this, but not somebody else?
In essence, you can't. But in the same sense, these are two different communities. So you have one community from the church and then another community from the secular world system. The loyalty in his fan base is based upon basically who's number one on the charts.
Right.
So they don't really owe him nothing in that world. People typically don't have a music career that spans as long as his has already. So younger guys have come up and kind of replaced where he's at anyways as far as relevance is. But from a biblical standpoint, they both deserve the same kind of generosity as far as forgiveness is concerned. I think with R. Kelly's situation, I know there has been some documentaries that have been released saying what has happened. There's been a lot of speculation, of course, a lot of bad media coverage. But for me, until I really don't know enough to really make a valid standpoint on either side of the fence. But regardless, forgiveness is in due, but it's hard to forgive what you don't know.
Right.
So at this point, nobody really knows. Of course, he's saying, I believe he's saying he's innocent. And in this country, we enjoy the privilege of being presumed innocent until proven guilty.
What's the hardest part for you, of the most challenging part of being a pastor?
Right now, it's starting from the ground up. We started, it was literally just me and my wife. I'm not a part of any mainstream denomination, so it's not like anybody gave me a lump sum of resources and said, hey, this is where you go, to get started. So we literally started from our own resources. And that means that, things that people often take for granted in church, where they don't recognize how much it costs. And they say things like, well, the church is, only about money and things like that. They're not aware of what goes into just having a seat for them to sit in, especially when the chairs are like $20 a piece.
Right. And there's something that you hear a lot about.
Right.
Scamming and different things like that. How do you feel about that when people say church is a scam?
There's a very small percentage of pastors. There's a very small percentage of churches in Charleston, period, that are even taking in enough money for anybody to be scamming anything. There's after you have paid overhead, as far as rent, just for us to be in this space, and I can only talk about what goes on here. After you've talked about paying rent, light, water, musicians, internet, advertising, after you've factored in all those costs, most of the times there's nothing left,
Right.
if anything. So, when we see shows like Preachers of LA and we see people living lavish lives, number one, I believe they've earned it. Okay, you never know the sacrifice people have put in getting started in ministry. We spent easily between $10,000 and $15,000.
Yeah.
and that's a low number. You're talking about the keyboard, $1,500 a month.
Insane. It's a lot of money. And I think another thing that I saw recently, a couple months back, that kind of blew up was the situation with Pastor John Gray. You know, when he bought his wife the car, but then he, of course, behind it he was, you know, had an affair or whatever. And it's like those kind of things like that make people like, well, is this where our money is going to, and different things like that. So I think that's what makes people
right. And Pastor Gray is an accomplished author and businessman. The church that he's at, he was hired to be the pastor. This is not a church where he started or a church where he has complete autonomy over the church. He was hired by a board to work there. So his compensation, it just blows my mind where people feel like they can dictate and put a cap on someone who was hired to do a job.
Right.
That's like me coming to your job and being like, hey, you're making too much money.
Yeah, it's true.
It's just ridiculous. He was hired to do a job. And I don't know what they pay him. You know, I don't know how many thousands of people that he has there every Sunday, but he deserves to be compensated. I mean, to run a church, he's not just showing up on Sundays and Wednesdays and preaching. There's day-to-day operations that go into managing, especially a church of that size, because he has staff. So if they don't pull in enough money on Sunday or Wednesday, guess what? He has families that don't eat.
Right.
So this is a day-to-day operation.
And I think it's people that they don't see when you explain it. People don't see like everything else that's going on.
Right, they're just looking at it as he's just showing up to church. But sermon preparation for me, and I've probably been doing that far less longer than he has. But for one message, is usually 5 to 6 hours.
Wow. So you're all for pastors making what they can, but now I know you don't agree with what he was doing behind, you know.
Right, and of course I never agree with infidelity or adultery or anything like that. I just wish people would express the same grace that they expect the pastor to give them. I do believe pastors are held to a higher standard, but if his wife can say it happened and we moved forward, there's nothing anybody else can say about that. After someone's wife has said, I forgive my husband, there's nothing nobody else can say about that.
What impact did your wife have on you?
I believe that for anything to come to fruition in the natural, it has to come through a womb. Jesus Christ, the greatest gift that the world has ever beheld, even God thought it necessary for him to come through a woman. Not saying that men cannot create things, but for something to be given birth to, I believe that it has to come through a woman. So I can really say that my ministry really gave birth through her.
Did she know you back then, or you?
She did not. She did not. She met me when I first started preaching. We were going to the same church back then.
Do you feel like, as a pastor, is it pressure for your children to follow in your footsteps?
No, not necessarily. Again, I'm not in their shoes, so my children are still very young. Most of them. I have one 11-year-old, the rest are toddlers. So, right now all they care about is eating.
Right, absolutely.
But as far as them feeling pressure, we don't force them to do. I don't, force them to do anything strenuous. We believe in the family living a godly life, but anything out, strenuous, we don't push on them to be, preachers or anything like that.
With so much on your plate, I know you're a busy man. Who do you try to talk to, like in your moments of like need, when you need somebody to talk to and get some things off your chest?
No, I believe every pastor needs a pastor. So I do have a bishop. I'm a part of a interdependent fellowship, and in times like that, I will consult. But I will say that as a pastor and as a senior leader, especially, wisdom tells you to have very few that you can consult in times like that. So it's essential for any young pastor to really make sure you have a direct line with God.
Absolutely. Do you Is looking back, is there anything you wish you would have done differently?
Honestly, I think everything I went through really built me into who I am. I think there was a time where I was like, man, I wish I never done this. You know, I wish I had just stayed in the church. But I believe that my story really, I believe my story, the way that it panned out, helps more people. That post that you're referring to, it was during the time where people were doing, I think it was like a 10-year challenge.
Yeah.
And I did not expect to get the feedback that I did. I mean, it just went completely viral.
Absolutely.
A lot of people reached out to me over it. Most just expressing how they were blessed, how they were encouraged because they have children going through similar phases, and for them to see how God brought me out on the other side encouraged them.
And I think it's important because you like you say, you never know who's watching and never know what somebody else is going through. So to see your story and your post,
it encourages them and it lets them know, okay, where I am in life is not necessarily over.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think people are more inclined to receive something that's not perfect.
Do you worry about things from your past, like coming back to haunt you in the sense where, like, for example, with you see like with social media nowadays, when like celebrities, they'll post something 10 years ago and they don't feel that way now. It's just like they matured over time. But do you feel like something like that? Do you ever worry about things like that? Maybe
I don't worry about things like that. Some things that I said when I first started preaching, 8-9 years ago, of course I wouldn't preach now. I'm just a lot wiser. I've seen a lot more. But as far as things haunt me, I mean, it amazes me the standard that people will try to hold pastors so that they don't even hold themselves.
Absolutely.
It just blows me away, man. So when I hear stuff like that, I just let it roll off my shoulders. Having been doing this for a while now, and I'm still a relatively young man, but having been doing this for a while now, you learn to get thick-skinned.
What would you say a scripture and from the Bible that best describes you?
I would say if I had to choose one, it would be Philippians, I believe 4:13. That says, "Through Christ I can do all things that strengthen me." That if I had to choose one, and that's very difficult, but if I had to choose one, I would say that one sums it up.
Just a few more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. What's the greatest impact you felt you made on someone's life?
I believe that as a pastor, we never know the complete effect that we're having on an individual's life. But as I've been privileged to travel extensively and share the word of the Lord, and sometimes just exclusively my testimony, hearing people that feel like they're trapped in that street life, because you can get to a point where you feel trapped. A lot of drug dealers are not out here trying to destroy communities. They're out here trying to survive. They're out here trying to feed their kids, and telling them just to believe in Jesus is simply not going to be enough. You have to provide resources. So them hearing my testimony and them hearing me explain exactly how I came out, and them and seeing that light bulb go off in their head is most rewarding. I love to see God's people set free and delivered.
Do you feel like to this point right now that you may owe anybody anything for maybe like encourage you to really turn things around? Do you feel like you owe anybody at this point?
I think at this point I owe God. At this point I owe God. Of course there were people that helped me along the way, but when I first answered the call, everyone else had pretty much left. Me and my brother were always close, but as far as pulling me to the forefront, of course I had pastors that believed in me, but when I went into the system, I didn't have a pastor.
Right.
So I owe God.
Absolutely. What was if it was somebody that you could talk to they may not be here with us today, if you had a chance to talk to them again, who would that person be for you?
Martin Luther King.
Martin King. Can you explain?
I believe what he did, and he's another one that people have tried to dig up dirt on and say that, he was unfaithful. And I mean, it shows that no matter how much good you do, it's going to be someone that's going to look for something, literally look for something.
And of course, nobody's perfect anyway.
Right, no one's perfect. But I believe, I would speak to him just because I believe the magnitude of the movement that he led is undeniable. And he really came to prominence in a time where he had every reason to react violently, but he did not. He had, he could have simply said, I'll just be a pastor and go home to my wife and leave this alone. But knowing that he would probably be executed, when you listen to his last speech, the famous, I've been to the mountaintop speech, you can almost feel the anguish in his heart that he expected to die soon. He began to talk about going to the promised land. He expected to die soon.
So he kind of saw it coming.
But he believed in what he believed in so strongly that he understood that the greatness of what he was pushing would outlive him.
I'm going to go back to something else you said real quick. You said that it's amazing how people hold pastors to a higher standard than what they hold themselves. Do you feel like sometimes you have to watch what you're doing because you're like, hey, somebody might... And I'm not saying you do anything, but just, some people might say, I seen pastor doing such and such or whatever. Do you feel like you have to kind of tread carefully of what you do nowadays? Or even like riding in a car, listening to music. Somebody say, I heard a pastor listening to secular music or something.
Now, I believe as a believer, you have to be careful what you do, period. Beyond being a pastor. As a believer, I was conscious of what I did. And Paul said, I beat my flesh into subjection. This is a daily process of you making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do. As far as me feeling like I have to watch myself, I just live my life. I don't live my life as far as I got to make sure I don't do this, I got to make sure I don't do that. Living for God is a way of life. So I don't expect to do something that someone would, be offended by. Of course, in this day and age, people are offended by anything. I enjoy clean music. I'm not going to listen to anything with a bunch of cussing, anything with a bunch of negative talk, but love music, 90s R&B, I listen to all the time.
Right.
And I encourage people to be well-rounded in their taste of music. I believe music is a beautiful thing, but if I'm, going out for a romantic life with my wife, I don't want to hear yes, Lord.
Absolutely. My final question, what would you say is your ultimate goal?
My ultimate goal is to spread the gospel throughout this community as far as I can. And what I mean by that is not reaching people that are church, but the day that I can look out into my congregation and see black, white, Chinese, Latino, see a multicultural church, a community center, not just a church, but something that could offer tools for underprivileged children that can really feed the hungry, house the shelterless. That's my ultimate goal, to build an epicenter that could really redistribute the wealth that is in this city, because I don't believe that there's a shortage of money. I think there has been an unfair and an unequal distribution of wealth. But I want to give people tools so that they can take care of their families outside of returning to the streets.
Absolutely. Well, Pastor Aiken, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to sit with you. Before we get out of here, do you want to leave a message or tell anybody where they can find you?
Well, we are located right here in the heart of North Charleston. The address is 8484 Dorchester Road, North Charleston, South Carolina. We're here every Sunday at 9 a.m. We're here every Wednesday at 7 p.m. I encourage people to look us up on www.gracecharleston.org. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram at Grace Charleston, and you can learn more about me on my website at CoreyAiken.org.
All right, thank you again, Pastor Aiken, and hope you guys enjoyed it. Till next time, keep chasing dreams. This Cross the Line podcast. Thank you for listening.